versus GM, Lutz, and Ford versus Rivian and Tesla in 2021, and why it is that Rivian did not want to partner with Ford. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy our show and would like better ideas on investing and trading Tesla stock, as well as trade consulting, etc., please join us on Patreon. Our top level folks get shows every day of the trading week, and I think you'll find the information helpful in your process. So I've been sort of planning or plotting this show for a few days, and I have to say I'm really, really disappointed, but I think you'll see why at the end. In particular, it's called huge job losses for the folks that are headquartered in Detroit, but for workers around the world for those companies. So the news story that we're working off is the fact that a decision was made by the folks at Rivian to not partner with Ford to deliver vehicles of any type. I was kind of shocked, disappointed when I saw this, because as you know, as many as 129 employees of Rivian came from Tesla. So what that then kind of means is that to some extent Rivian is kind of a stepchild or former child of Tesla, and there are a lot of similarities in terms of the battery technology being used, etc. I have to give the folks at Rivian huge credit for not going directly at Tesla, as Lucid and others have, in terms of very similar products. And the pickup segment slash SUV segment that they're targeting, I think, is a smart way to go. So I sort of have a story here for you, which is, there's a friend of mine who was part of a startup, a software company startup, and there's a company called EMC that bought them. And the CEO of EMC approached them and said, look, we like the product you're delivering, makes a great difference in the marketplace, but we're going to give you two choices. Choice number one is sell to us, or choice number two, we'll replicate what you guys do in the marketplace and wipe you out through our technology capabilities. So what ended up happening was they decided to sell to avoid that threat. And so it's kind of like one of those, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. So I thought this was kind of interesting because, as you know, Ford had a $500 million investment that became worth $10 billion once Rivian IPO'd. So that's actually some nice cash. What we also had was, I believe, a bigger investment from the folks at Amazon targeting 100,000 vehicles so they could have electric delivery vehicles moving around instead of the current gasoline powered. So I believe that what happened in that negotiation was Ford indicated that they'd like to, as part of that investment, go ahead and work with Rivian to optimize products being sold. And I wouldn't be surprised, much like what Cisco is sort of the leader in the acquisition process. So they typically have if your stuff works, we'll buy you agreement with those companies. And I believe this very much could have been the case when it comes between Ford and Rivian. And so the weird thing or question that popped up is, if Ford didn't buy Rivian, how exactly was that going to work, where they do sort of co-building of vehicles, and Rivian has, in essence, a lot more experience in electric vehicles than Ford does. So basically, Rivian would be competing with itself if it worked with Ford, not as a parent, but as a partner to deliver vehicles. So I really don't think that, for this reason, a partnership with Ford was going to work that great for the interest that both Ford and Rivian might have. The other problem I saw here, which is why I think that this whole thing collapsed is there's a deal going between an investment made by Amazon and the number of vehicles that have been ordered by Amazon in terms of the production process that those folks were going through. So I'm intrigued here that, as with the EMC deal I just mentioned, Ford didn't just inform Rivian that they would just buy them out in the marketplace or get to 51% control and then just do the merger from there. Because if you already have 12% at 10 bill and you have the assets of Ford, you could easily get going to the markets and get some debt raising driven by holding more Rivian or just buying it in the open marketplace. I don't know if they can get to enough percentage to, in essence, take control and then systematically take it over time, but that's another problem. So why I'm kind of sad today is that Ford is actually making a strong effort. They're putting out the Lightning vehicle we discussed. They're also, obviously they put the EV Mustang out as a way to sort of have products that are in the marketplace and that seem to be well received by the buying public. And so I guess, that's not bad. They do lag in terms of having the charging facilities that customers want, that Tesla has to offer. And then, obviously there's a lot of other optimizations that Tesla's doing, including power walls, et cetera, that really make it a broad solution that's nicely integrated, not unlike Apple, for customers in the electric space. So even as we have big brands entering, it's turning out that the whole discussion is how powerful those new entrants might be, but Tesla's just a juggernaut that keeps running all these folks over. So one of the data points that's emerged is that to date, as of a year ago, there had been 100,000 job losses in Germany relative to Tesla's entrance in the Chinese market heavily, as well as the European and American market, because the price point segments of most Tesla vehicles really target the, sort of where the German makes are the most powerful around the world. So obviously they're starting to lose jobs, but now that we're seeing huge numbers of Teslas rolling into US homes as well, as Tesla's manufacture starts rising, we're also seeing a hit to both domestic and foreign manufacturers here from Tesla's growth. So I really think that where we are right now is we're on the verge of an onslaught of Tesla gaining huge market share and really establishing itself in the EV space dramatically as the rest of the market basically tries to catch up. So the disappointment I have is that Ford and Rivian couldn't work something out, because I think that Rivian's expertise and Ford's manufacturing capacity would have allowed the two of them to perhaps deliver a lot more vehicles faster than the, maybe 50,000 vehicles that are planned to be delivered by Rivian over the next year or two. So I'm hopeful, frankly, that all the people at places like Ford and GM might achieve, new products that enable them to be viable as we enter this new space. But it's very easy to assume that they can close out Tesla quickly. But as the Ford CEO pointed out, not only is Tesla's battery better, but it's cheaper than the battery being produced by them. So this is kind of an interesting sort of set of circumstances, set of data to review, which is sort of Ford and the other OEMs like VW and Mercedes assumed they would be able to quickly sort of catch up and eclipse Tesla, and therefore be able to manage how their brands enter the future that might have a lot of EVs. And clearly this hasn't gone as they've planned or predicted. And as we watch the negotiations that are going on, or that did go on, I just was amazed, because with Rivian going public, we ran into another problem for these OEMs, which is the folks at Rivian could actually argue that their market cap is actually as big, if not bigger, than Ford's. So why should we take a subordinate position and sell to you and or build products for you when the marketplace is saying we're the equivalent market cap size to you? And so if we need capital to do things in the future, we can easily go out and issue bonds or stock or whatever we need in order to grow. And therefore, we really don't need your money. And you don't necessarily have superior expertise that you can deliver, even if the footprint of dealerships, et cetera, might be of value in terms of delivery of vehicles, sales, et cetera. So again, I just think this is really unfortunate. And what it's saying is that, the large OEMs did have a capital access advantage along with the other advantages I just described in terms of why excellent EV manufacturers would consider partnering. And the fact that those firms are saying the market is definitely on our side of this or willing to help fund our future, they basically are saying that we think that when you look at how you guys are doing business, your future is limited or in bad shape if you're not able to catch up with the years of a competitive advantage we have when it comes to EV manufacturing in every aspect. So I have to say that I'm very sad about this because I was hoping the two companies would get together. We'd see beautiful work togethers that resulted in both companies, doing well, possibly as a combined entity. And I have to also say that this reminds me of some of the rules of high tech in terms of how things have been working over the last few years, transitioning from Silicon Valley into the Rust Belt. Two quick examples that come to mind are, number one, when Google was starting to roll, Microsoft offered to buy them. And the folks at Google said, no thanks, we want to stay independent. And obviously they're as big, if not bigger than Microsoft right now. And a second example would be as Facebook started getting rolling, the folks at Google first attempted to buy them, and then they subsequently tried to create Google Plus as a way to replicate what Facebook was doing. And they ended up shutting down that operation because they didn't get very good traction in terms of competing with Google in that space. So, or Google's competition with Facebook proved not to be successful. And so I bring up those two examples because, yes, Tesla was successful, but now you have a similar sort of babies of Tesla or kids of Tesla showing up, getting giant market values, and they can use that market values to sort of become a Tesla in the niches that Tesla is not currently covering. So I believe that this is a nightmare disaster, and I'm hopeful that something can be done before it becomes a complete rout that we see going on here. The folks at Ford seem inclined to, try to make a change and respond, but you can really see the fact that as the CEO of Ford has started to do his process, he's really having to lobby all the stakeholders, be it the dealerships or unions or even his own company, in terms of energizing everyone to get on the same accord to deliver that win. I think this kind of highlights another Silicon Valley rule is that what often would happen, and Cisco is one of the biggest examples of this, is there was a process that went on where the folks at Cisco would create a skunk works of current managers and then ship them out into a separate operation, allow them to develop products that are optimized. And once they start getting going and have customer relationships start developing based on the resources of the corporate parent, they would then be bought back in after they'd gotten it going by the sort of parent company, in this case Cisco. But that skunk works process is one way to get around potential corporate bureaucracy that might negatively impact the forward progress of what they're trying to do. So I, uh, I have to say that I'm kind of stunned at Silicon's ability, the Silicon Valley folks' ability to, instead of having the giant auto companies impose their will on Silicon Valley is now starting to impose its process and mandate on the rest of the auto industry. And I have to say, this is kind of a shocker because usually the giant market cap, long-standing companies are able to sort of find a strategy, process, or technique to sort of blow out uh, newcomers and therefore retain their market share and relationships with customers, et cetera. And that's obviously not happening in the EV space, first with Tesla, and now we're seeing it with Rivian and possibly with Lucid. And so the question mark is, with all these competitors entering and grabbing market share in an important sort of future business, you know, what do things look like in terms of the possibility of the current sort of giant manufacturers retaining control of the space? And I'd have to say things are looking kind of bleak, even if you want to say, I'm going to stick with the Up with Hope plan that, we'd see good things coming from GM and Ford. So I guess the final note I wanted to make on this was, if you look at the whole thing, the companies that have no chance of making it seem to be the ones that are, ready to partner, be sold, et cetera. For example, Lordstown Motors and some of the other partnerships that GM has done were definitely attempts to get this done, but sort of the weak sisters of that field seem to be ready to partner and consume resources, but don't seem to add a lot of value in terms of being competitive. So overall, I think there's some interesting data points here about what's going on, but it really looks like Silicon Valley has sort of is going after sales, et cetera, of the big three, or call it the big 10 as we go around the globe. And it just seems like those folks seem to be fairly defenseless right now in losing their market share as Tesla et al. Enters the space. So I wanted to mention all of this because obviously we can all see what's going on here in general, but there's also, I really think, should be an alarm bell to the large entities that they really need to accelerate plans and improve the quality of what their plan might be in order to stay viable, which may not be the case right now. So we shall see how this plays out, and we shall definitely be covering it. At any rate, this is the end of our formal Tesla comments. Clearly, I think it suggests Tesla and Rivian have bright futures with the competition being somewhat disorganized as they come after these two. And then obviously things like, chip shortages, et cetera, just add to the pile of challenges that these entities have in coming after these companies. So all I can say is more money for Tesla, probably a lot more money for Rivian as well. It may take longer than expected with Rivian, but I think Tesla is showing what it can do big time. So we want to remind you, please take time to like and subscribe. Also wanted to encourage you, consider joining us on Patreon for more information to enhance your investing and trading process. Next, we'd also like to encourage you to consider the health tips that we typically go through. There's a list down below. I typically emphasize one point. There's a doc that we met who is a professor of medicine at the University of Louisville and an upper respiratory cancer doc. And he pointed out that the challenge right now in his space is there are a lot of people that are eating quickly and jumping in bed. All the stomach acids that digest the food, instead of staying in the stomach, then get to roll up into your upper respiratory area, cause discomfort, and one of those discomforts could actually be cancer. So he encourages that you minimum take 2 hours prior to or post eating, prior to going to bed, and ideally 4 hours to let the food completely digest before you go to bed. avoiding this problem. And yes, you could try the over-the-counter topical stuff, but it'll provide temporary relief, but the damage is still done, and that's one of the reasons why you're feeling that pain. So I wanted to encourage you to consider this in your process. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss German, au revoir French, Lehitro Hebrew, Hoda Hafez Farsi, Strasvice Russian, hello, Ni hao ma, Chinese, Namaste, Hindi, G'day, our friends in Australia, Hey Do, our friends in Sweden, Arrivederci, our friends in Italy, Salam, our friends that are Muslim, and Asante for our friends in Swahili. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us, and we look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day, and bye for now. Ode to Joy by Beethoven.